Okay, once again, we have fun for the whole family. All right? How many of you read Sophocles? What'd you think? What's funny about this? You all smile like, wow, that's humorous. It's so twisted in the way it is funny. Yeah, I have that same sort of black humor response sometimes. What'd you think? So there's all this sex and death and weird stuff, and nobody thinks anything, except that it's funny. That's different. All right. Yeah?
It's disturbing.
Good. That's a really sane response. If you do not find this disturbing, there is something wrong with you. Right, yeah. This is another one of those badly dysfunctional families. What else?
You start to like really sympathize with Oedipus, I feel like, throughout the plays. Like you start to see like, oh, maybe it was fate after all and he didn't do these because he was a bad guy.
Okay. He is the unluckiest man in the world. He's fated to get the worst thing happen to him. Right? And he's a pariah. And he hates life, he hates existence, and he insisted he's not guilty because he didn't want to do anything wrong. We get a new idea here in the judgment of morality. Intent matters. He gets accused of being a pariah, a man who's transgressed normal human moral bounds. And he says, yeah, but I didn't know. It wasn't my fault. And that's a plausible response. It's part of why he's sympathetic. What else? Yeah.
It's kind of interesting how in the first one, Oedipus Remus, he, at the end, gouged his eyes out instead of killing himself.
Yeah, it'll ruin your whole day, of course. Yeah. Right? He doesn't kill himself. You have to imagine, all right, you have to know a little bit about Greek fashion to understand what's going on there, okay? Oedipus finds out that he's been fated, he's been cursed, he was shipped around as an infant, and the result was that he ended up killing his father at the crossroads, solving the riddle because he's smart. The Greeks are really smart. The problem is that they're not always lucky, or perhaps they're fated to make a mess of their own lives. But he's an excellent example of a Greek because he's smart, able to fight, able to talk, able to think, able to do whatever he needs. He has many of the heroic qualities associated with Odysseus, except that this is a bad trip. This is a real bad trip. Yeah, he's going home. But this Nostos, this homecoming, it's too twisted. And you're all smiling as you are one sick bunch of people. You're all smiling like that's really funny. No, it's not. Which, of course, makes it even funnier. I know. Isn't it really twisted? I'm a sick pup, too. I mean, I agree with all you. No, you remember when Jocasta's telling him, look, you really don't want to go any further in inquiring about this. And he says, oh, yes, I do. And she said, no, you don't. Yes, you do. And you're all smiling and laughing now. Sick, sick, sick. I think it's funny, too. But it's really sick to find that funny. You know that. Right? There should be at best a guilty pleasure for all of you. And you're all smiling like, wow, that's the funniest thing I've heard. This is Oedipus, for God's sake. There's nothing funny about this. And everybody's smiling. God help us all. One of these is a mess. All right. Yeah.
You're saying about Greek fashion?
Ah, Greek fashion, yeah. All right. You have to understand how a noble Greek woman dresses. She wears something not quite like a toga, and it's not quite like a sari, like Indian women wear, if you know what those look like. A sari? Okay. What they do is they have linen of some kind, and it's pinned at the shoulders with gold brooches. So that's how a woman gets dressed. It's something like an evening gown, but noble women wear it every day. Now, his mom has figured out that she's also his wife, and then of course it's going to make Thanksgiving very awkward. So instead, she decides to go hang herself. Okay, this is a Greek tragedy and people are messed up. So naturally she's going to go hang herself. Oedipus has just found out the truth about himself, and he wants to go back and confront the mess he's made of his life. He finds Jocasta dead. All all right? She's hung herself, which is would have been thought of as a relatively mild way of going, all right? It's an easier way than the other possible alternatives. Now, you have to remember what the scene is going to look like, because they can't put this on stage because they don't have the dramatical abilities to do it. But you have to imagine this woman hanging from a noose from the rafter, okay? And there, kind of spinning around lazily, is the dead body of his wife, mother. Okay, now, this is just too much for Oedipus. And that's, look, too much for Oedipus is too much, all right? So he reaches up, pulls the brooches off. The result is that her clothes fall off, and then what he sees is the naked body of his dead wife mother. And then he says, you know, this is kind of painful to see, so I'm just going to gouge my eyes out because it feels so much better. Oh, man. That's how you know you've had a bad day. When you say, I'd rather gouge my eyes out than continue to use them to look at this. Again, this is the big disclosure just between privately her and Oedipus, but this is an obscene and bizarre disclosure. All right? Incest and parricide and suicide and then self-mutilation. Because, look, it'd be nice if Oedipus just said, look, let me cut my own throat. I should die now. But no, he's got to linger on for a while because he hasn't suffered enough. God almighty. Suffering apparently makes people wise, and Oedipus had confronted the fundamental unfairness of life. There's no good reason why he should have this happen to him. He happened to be cursed. Right? Jocasta and her husband got rid of him. But of course, an old servant felt bad for him. Here's the deal. If this had been a Christian play, the old servant would have been the hero, saving the kid from getting killed. Here, being nice and sentimental and kind to the child, that's just going to get everybody killed. Right? No, this is not a Christian play. There's no such thing as a Christian tragedy. Tragedy is intrinsically pagan because of the fact that for a Christian, there's an afterlife and a final judgment where God straightens everything out. Here, once you're dead, you're just dead. All right? It would be really nice if your family would bury you, because then you could go to Hades. Otherwise, you're going to be bumping around the world as one of the undead. I don't know exactly what's involved, but apparently you can't get into Hades without the proper rituals. All right? Yeah.
Wouldn't that be better to not get into Hades? To be left?
Well, no. The idea is that although he sinned, it's not his fault. I mean, it wasn't intentional. So the question, we have a new question in Greek morals here, Greek ethics. What makes someone morally responsible? Is it doing an action or intending to do an action? Get ready for Kant later on. All right? And look, in Christian ethics, we always ask ourselves, what were the intentions of the agents? We don't hold people morally accountable for things they didn't intend or things that happened by accident. All right? If you're driving down Route 75 and you get hit by a meteor, nobody's going to say, oh, it was an awful thing for that person to do. I mean, just that's what happens. All right? Well, Oedipus essentially gets hit by a meteor. All right? Something nobody saw coming, nobody could have predicted. It's the worst possible thing that could happen to you, and it happened to him. And he was not a bad guy. In other words, he was an able, capable young man. He had many qualities of leadership and achievement. He's smart, right? He frees the city of Thebes from the Sphinx. Granted, he kills his father at the crossroads, but anybody who had been brought up in the Greek tradition would not have been willing to take any crap from a stranger at the crossroads. So this could have been any hero. All right. Well, what else? Yeah.
So did Laius try to kill him when he just saw him at the crossroads?
Yeah.
They for what reason though? Like what?
Because it was part status. In other words, when you come to a crossroad, the higher status man moves on, and the lower status man waits and is deferent. Here, they both went because they were at a crossroads. And he said, I don't know who this guy is, but he crosses in front of me. I'm going to take his head off. Hubris. Okay. What else? Yeah.
This guy's reading, I just found something oddly ironic, because it was after, like, he learned the truth, like, almost enlightenment, that he gouged out his eyes.
Yeah.
And then there was one other thing that it was interesting because the man who, like, in the beginning had saved Thebes was not, like, the same one who was destroying it, so it's this weird flip.
Yeah, there's lots of dramatic irony here, all right? Sophocles is a master of that, and he's realistic, but not overly so. He represents people as they possibly could be, or as they should be, not necessarily as they are. We'll have to get that one from Euripides. Okay. And there are lots of cruel ironies here. Just about everything Oedipus says before he finds out what the deal is, it's all ironic. It's just no, no, no. And the chorus is saying, no, this is not good. We don't like the looks of this. All right. And of course, the whole family is going to get messed up. All right. So Jocasta's dead, and Jocasta's brother Creon is going to end up becoming the king of Thebes. And then, of course, his life is completely messed up too. We wouldn't want anybody. Nobody gets out alive. Yeah.
I was getting a little bit skeptical of the age differences of everybody because Oedipus had to have been really. I mean, they described Oedipus like he was very, very old, and granted, he was probably very worn down from the life he had had, but still, they made it sound like he was very old at the end of Oedipus Colonos. But Creon was still alive and kicking, and the next play, he's the king. He's the one that ends up still being alive at the end of the whole thing. He must be really old.
Okay, well, that would be the case if this were a 3-play cycle. In other words, every year, if you're going to compete in the Dionysia, in the Festival of Dionysus, you submit 3 related tragedies plus a comedy, a satyr play at the end. These are not part of a trilogy. They're actually done at very different times. They're separated by 50 or 60 years, actually. He had a very long life, Sophocles, and he was still, new plays were still being produced posthumously after he died. He died 2 years before the end of the Peloponnesian War, so he sees that the end is upon him. Right? So, yes, the chronology is different, but that's because the plays themselves are different, right? They weren't part of one coherent whole. So each of these was 3 separate standalone plays. We just don't have them. Sophocles is said to have written 120 plays and done very well. He's the most popular tragedian in Athens, and only 7 survive. That's really unfortunate. And there's, I think, about the same number of Aeschylus, and I think there are 20 or so of Euripides. In other words, if you wanted to read all of Greek tragedy, you would have no problem doing that in the summer. That's all we have of it. What we have is the good stuff. All right, what else? Yeah.
This is just a side question, but is Tiresias the same, like the blind prophet, is he the same as the god of the underworld? Or
No. Tiresias is a separate guy.
Okay.
Tiresias is a stock figure. He is Mr. Know-It-All. He sees into the future, and he's always right. In tragedies, that means that people that are fated to have terrible things happen to them always mock and ignore Tiresias. Right? That's always a sign that something terrible is going to happen to you. If Tiresias shows up and he says, straighten out, kid, you know, this is going bad. I'm old, I'm smart, I'm a prophet, I see what's going on. All right? So we're going to see Tiresias again when we read Euripides, but he's in a lot of plays. He's a stock figure of the guy who sees into the future. And he's not like Cassandra in the sense that he's fated to be ignored, but people ignore him anyway. Which just shows you how messed up people are. What else? Somebody a hand back there. Yeah?
I'm just going to, I kind of got the sense that Antigone was the earlier one.
What?
Is Antigone it's the earlier one, right?
Let's see. Yeah, Antigone is the earliest. That's before the Peloponnesian War, 441. He was a young man then. All right? And that's out of order because if you look at the plays themselves, Antigone should be the last when Creon's family gets all messed up, right? But it was actually the first written. And it's about Oedipus at Colonos is posthumous. That's 401. So at that point, the Peloponnesian War has been over for 3 years, and Athens lost. And what does we find out there? Only death brings freedom, which is a typically lively Greek insight from tragedy. You want freedom, You got to be dead. Call no man happy until he is dead. Well, moving right along. So that's Oedipus and Colonus is posthumous. Antigone is early, it's 441, and Oedipus Rex is probably about 430, just before the beginning of the war. Okay, so these are taken from far separate areas, domains of time, and the context, that's why I had to read the historians first. The context is going to tell you something about this. As you look at the prospect of the Peloponnesian War, you might have one view of Athens. Two, if you're writing at the time that Athens is about to lose the war, you're going to have a very different feel. Right? That counts for a lot. That's why we do the historians first. You really need them. Okay, what's wrong with this family? Nobody can think of anything, yeah. Louder.
A lot of incest.
Oh, there's that, yeah, there's incest.
And they're really, honestly, it's like the number one thing is they're just fated for a really horrible thing. Which I find, it's difficult to say that there's a lot wrong with them, because it seems that a lot of, like, it seems by the end of it all, in Columbus Season of this last one that was released, it seems that there's some sort of sense of, the Oedipus was kind of justified in the end. He was innocent in a way, even though he was guilty of all.
That's important, yes.
He was innocent in a way. And so it seems almost like maybe they had this idea that humans weren't necessarily responsible for the mistakes they made in life. I don't know fully.
Well, there are degrees of responsibility, but you're right, though. Oedipus didn't actively choose the things he was doing because he didn't know what was going on. Right? I think of the part of Scripture where it says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Well, a good portion of human life that's true of. Yeah.
It also kind of struck me that in this like set of a tragedy and horrible family, it's a lot different from the House of Atreus, because they actually like deserve what they got.
Yeah. Okay. We're building, we're changing and developing our ideas of right and wrong in the plays. That's what's important here. You can actually chart the focus, change of focus from blood vendetta to law. That's what we get in the Oresteia. And here what we're going to get is the question of what makes someone guilty? Is it intent or is it the action? Yeah.
With going back to with the law and how what's his name didn't get punished, or he was going to get punished for killing Clytemnestra. How come then Oedipus didn't, when they found out he killed Laius, how come they didn't like give him a punishment? Really?
Well, because no punishment is sufficient for parricide. It's the worst and most unnatural kind of murder. So the penalty for murder is death. The penalty for murdering your father, well, we just don't know. We don't have a penalty bad enough for that. And the fact that you also had sex with your mother and fathered 3 children with her, we can't fix that. We don't know what we're going to do with that. In other words, this is uniquely awful.
Yeah.
All right. So in other words, well, ask yourself, what would an American do in these situations? We just don't have laws that apply to weird situations like this. You accidentally killed your father and then unknowingly had sex with your mother and started a little family. That's not good. All right, and your mom, Oedipus's mom, who's also Oedipus's wife, kills herself, and the last visual image he has in his mind before gouging on his eyes is the dead body of his mother/wife. No. In other words, there's big parts of this, at least for me, that where I say, my mind really doesn't want this information. Please take that back. I sometimes feel that way. You ever feel that way when you read Dostoevsky, too? Like, no, there's no need to show me that dark corner of the human soul. I would rather not know anything about that. But you insist that I have to kind of push my face and I got to look right up at it. Good God, and look at this. I mean, man, everybody's messed up. Everybody's on a one-way trip to misery, to the worst possible human circumstance. And yet, throughout all this, we have Antigone, that shining light of natural law. Shining light of natural law. That's a funny thing in a kind of deeply neurotic 14-year-old girl is going to be our paragon of natural moral obligation. That's very strange. And also, why do we need Oedipus and Colytus to have him die? Why can't he have him die at the end instead of just sucking up to Creon the way he does? You know, the tragedy is supposed to give us a death. We don't even get a death here. I guess that Oedipus's fate at the end of this is worse than being dead. I mean, because here you just have the ongoing misery and pain and nothing else. And he asked, please, for the sake of the city, drive me out of the city, because now I want to be no longer a social animal. I'll bring my 2 children with me, who are also my half-brothers, half-sisters. Okay. Well, that's going to be quite a party, isn't it? Yeah? No? Okay. So, the whole house is messed up. Everybody involved has something awful happen to them. There aren't any winners here. This is a lose-lose-lose proposition. There aren't all that many of those in the world. I mean, that's part of what's great about Sophocles. He has one twisted imagination. All right. Okay, yeah.
So what's the story with Eteocles and Polynices? Can it be said of them that they didn't intend these things, or is that not true of them?
Okay. These boys allowed their father to be ill-treated. In other words, when their father was being driven out, they didn't go with him. They weren't willing to support their dad, and that was their first obligation. The girls did, the daughters did. The boys said, look, instead, since we're the princes of Thebes, and dad turns out to be unfit to be king, one of us has to be king. So they fight it out. They get a civil war. All right? And the civil war is brother against brother. And in Oedipus and Colytus, when Polynices is still alive and he comes to Oedipus and says, Dad, fight with me. He says, no. You turned your back on me when I had this terrible misery happen to me. I'm not supporting you. I'm not supporting your brother. Instead, I curse you both. As though there are not curse enough going around. I curse you both. May you both die from each other's swords, which they do. That's kind of a rough way to go. I mean, it's bad enough to die in warfare, but it's really bad to have your brother kill you and you him at the same time, for God's sake. So they're dead. Now Creon, who is full of sophistical ideas, who can talk himself out of anything, he's a new ruler, and he's nervous on the throne, like Machiavelli would tell him to be. Watch out, all right? You're not securely there. So he says that he's going to give honors in the death of Eteocles, and the brother is going to be fed to ravens and dogs. All right. What that means is that Polynices, the brother that doesn't get the burial, he doesn't go to Hades, and he is one of those miserable spirits that roams the earth and is part of the whole bestiary of Science 1.0. Okay. For the Greeks, it's a big deal. Think about, once again, back to the end of the Iliad. It's a big deal to get those funeral rites. It's a natural moral obligation for your closest family member to make sure that you are buried and not torn apart by dogs and eaten. Right? And you go, remember Herodotus, nomos is all, right? This is a society in which the nomos requires a decent burial. All right? So, Antigone decides that she's going to help out. She's going to defy Creon. What's the pluses and minuses of that idea? Yeah.
She's dying for what she thinks is right by the gods and not by the law.
Okay. She thinks that there's a moral law, a moral imperative, independent of the positive law of the state. What she's arguing for is the idea of natural law. You have a natural moral obligation to members of your family, which is prior to political order. In some ways, it reminds me of Locke's idea of the state of nature, because there's moral order there before we get the social contract. Well, she says, look, I have an obligation to my brother. All right? He's been given this terrible fate. Creon is going to make things worse. And even though it's going to cost me a lot, my life, I'm going to go and do the right thing. Okay. Now notice, we don't get any of that interesting prelude, any of that foreshadowing for death that we got at Oedipus and Colonus. Notice that you have to have thunder before Oedipus goes and dies. And then he has to get buried someplace where only Theseus knows where he is. But the point is, all the advantages that come to having Oedipus there accrue to Athens, not to Thebes. Okay? So, suffering creates wisdom. That's the idea. And Athens, once again, remember that Oedipus and Colonus is at the sanctuary of the Eumenides, and you know who they are, right? When you read Greek tragedy, you'll find that it all dovetails, all right? So it's not an accident that we're at the shrine of the Eumenides, who used to be the Furies, and they're not chasing after Oedipus anymore. I mean, in other words, there's nothing they could do to him to be any worse than what's already happened to him. So the Eumenides are actually being the kindly ones. And then we get Creon, the lawbreaker. Creon is not a king. Creon is a tyrant. He does not have a legal claim to this. Jocasta was his sister, but the throne does not go through the female line. Right? But because Polynices and Eteocles have killed one another, there's a gap. Creon seizes the opportunity. But the problem is now, what do you do when you're a ruler of dubious legitimacy? And some daughter of this crazy family decides that she knows better than you about right and wrong and about the will of the gods. You have to see how unequal this is. Remember that when Oedipus is at Colonus with his two daughters, when they leave, when they finish Oedipus the king, they're children then. This is a few years later, all right, but they're still very young. Antigone is older than Isemene, and she's not very old, 13, 14 years old. She does not understand herself very well, and self-understanding is a really big deal in Greek tragedy. Actually, it's also a real big deal in Shakespearean tragedy. Right? That know thyself theme is actually very important. The big question that Oedipus demands of us, asks of us, is this. You know the oracle at Delphi? Well, Sophocles is very conservative and very pious about that. He takes them seriously. What Delphi says goes. You can rely on the oracle at Delphi. Now, the oracle at Delphi, I think, has actually made a great cultural contribution by having two things, two injunctions, two orders written on the pediment of the temple. The two orders are, know thyself and nothing to excess. Now that, on the whole, is very good advice. You will avoid at least 50% of the problems in your life if you follow those two injunctions. Most of the things people do wrong are one or the other. They lie to themselves, which is the most dangerous and insidious kind of lie. And it's not a hard thing to do. We're all given to self-deception. But lying to yourself is the lie that you can't fix until something really bad happens and you realize that. In other words, you're getting ready for a disaster when you lie to yourself. There's no good, nothing good has ever come from self-deception. But the other idea, and there's much to be said for this, is nothing to excess. Have a sense of proportion. How much is enough? That's actually a really important thing to know too. A large portion of human judgment, what Aristotle calls phronesis, is knowing in a given circumstance how much is enough, how much bravery is enough, how much sacrifice is enough, how much revenge is enough, how much justice is enough. Okay, that's by no means easy because there isn't one universal rule, some algorithm that allows us to determine what exactly the right amount is. Right? One of the things that's important to learn from Greek tragedy is that hubris is destructive but it's also what makes people better than animals and almost as good as the gods. All right? Without hubris, Prometheus would never have stolen the fire of the gods. And he says, Prometheus claims that the gods will eventually die and they'll be superseded by something else. All right? So the Greeks are all about hubris because they're pushing the envelope. But the problem is, once you go from a practically useful amount of hubris, daring, to a dangerous amount, you don't know you're at the dangerous amount until you've crossed the line. So in other words, you don't find out how much is too much or how much is enough until you find out how much is too much. And think about it, if you just think about your own life. Yeah, in circumstances where you don't know what the right degree of something is, you won't find out until you're too far gone. That's what makes tragedy tragic. It's part of human excellence to push the envelope. Try and run the 4-minute mile. Try and set some other record. You can only do that by pushing the envelope and by having a very high regard for your own capacities. All right? The Greeks were all about heroism. The problem is, heroes are often their own worst enemies. All right? Why? Because they don't know themselves. And because they lack a sense of proportion. They go too far. Now, the Oedipus plays are about this very simple, but also very difficult problem. What happens, hypothetically speaking, if the Delphic injunctions work against one another? What if they're contradictory rather than consistent? Oedipus, unfortunately, has this lust, this tremendous desire to know who he is. And that's good advice. Know thyself. But the question now emerges, how much is a good amount of self-knowledge? Oedipus says, give me it all. And Jocasta says, no, no, no. And Oedipus says, yeah, I want it all. And Jocasta says, I'm going to go hang myself. And Oedipus says, I still want to know who I am. Okay. Right. Now notice, Jocasta figures out before Oedipus does what's going on. That's where you are sick people, all of you. Everybody thinks this is funny. You all need to see a psychiatrist. There's nothing funny about incest and suicide and gouging out your eyes and all the other humorous stuff you're finding in this. This is sick, sick, sick. I thought that tragedy might have been a problem for ancient Athens. Hell, it's a problem for you. Everybody thinks this is funny. No, it's not. What a humorous interaction. Jocasta says, oh no. Oedipus says, I really want to know who I am. Jocasta says, no, 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 you don't. And I'm going to go hang myself. Remember, Oedipus, I have really sharp brooches on the top of my gown, so when you see me twirling around from the rafter, the last thing you want carved into your memory is the body of your dead, naked mother-wife. I mean, that's just, that finishes off a bad day, right? Because then he gouges his eyes out because it feels so much better to have your eyes gouged out than to look at that. Yeah, this is fun for the whole family, isn't it? Why is it that everybody finds this funny? You're all twisted. All right. Well, it is funny, which is what bothers me too. I'm really twisted as well. I admit it's a guilty pleasure, but I find that that back and forth between Jocasta and Oedipus hilarious. Sick, 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 I know. And you're laughing at it. You find it funny too, and you're as twisted as I am. Okay. Now, let's talk about Creon's family. What's that like? Creon, remember him? What's his family like? The usurper. Remember that Antigone's supposed to be his daughter-in-law,
Right.
which is going to make things complicated.
Right.
So they're betrothed. Okay. And the idea that Dad's going to kill Antigone gets Haman all excited. He says, "Oh, well, you know, I was trying to be deferential, Dad, but you really shouldn't kill her. She's 14, and she did what was right by her family. And by the way, killing my betrothed just isn't the right thing to do in a family." Yeah.
It seemed like at first he was like on his side, like backing him up,
That's right.
and then he changed like mid-conversation. Like, is that the case?
Yeah. In other words, he was trying to get over on his dad. Don't tell me that none of you know what's involved in that. My daughters do it all the time. All right. So they knew how to get over on their dad. He knew how to get over on his dad, tried it, but could only go so far because his dad can't afford to be second guessed. He can't afford to be wrong. All right. So he's in a rage with his son, and he says, "I'm going to kill her before your very eyes." Now, this eye theme, of course, is not, this is the wrong family for that. All right. So Haman gets all excited. He goes off. And then we have an even worse denouement there. Who's going to present this? Somebody got, oh, do. Oh, you've been laughing at it too, huh?
Three of us.
Please, talk. Do what you're doing.
This is like an actual.
You do them anyway.
This is like an actual.
If I were you, I would start, I would say, with Oedipus. And then go to
But they
Oedipus.
say
Call
that
it.
it's just like
It's
a
gonna
story.
go there, too.
It's just a
Because
play,
that's
right?
why-
Well, it's a story that's very old. It's just for the entertainment. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'm presenting on.
Louder.
I'm presenting on Oedipus Rex. So, so it's a story of obviously unavoidable fate. And although Oedipus does not clearly intend all of the outcomes, I'm going to go through and show how his hubris does lead to a lot of the falling out of the fate that's fated. So the first part of his fate, that he's bound to kill his father, what first launches that is when he actually finds out about his fate, and he hears from the oracle that he's fated to kill his father and marry his mother. So he leaves his adopted parents, who he believes to be his real parents, in an attempt to actually avoid the fate, which just ends up furthering his fate along, ironically, and it leads him to going to meet his father and killing him. But the act of trying to avoid his fate in a way is an example of hubris, because a fate is a fate and you can't really change the fate of the gods. And what he's trying to do is to put himself above the gods in a way and show that he can actually change what is fated for him. So that sort of hubris leads him to go on and to kill his father and to fulfill.
Okay, remember, just for a second, remember that some problems don't have a solution. Oedipus' problem of being fated to kill his father and have sex with his mother and start a family, what's the good way of dealing with that? Killing yourself? Or running away, trying to avoid that fate? Running away is the natural thing to do. The problem is, when you run away, you can't run away from fate. It's not going to work. So, one of the things that the Greeks are looking at here is something like the Melian dialogue. What do you do in circumstances when there's no good choice? How do you figure out which choice is the least bad? And whatever the least bad choice was, it wasn't what actually happened to Oedipus. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think he doesn't really know what choice to do, as you said. But part of the hubris that he has is an immediate cause of his fate. And then so, obviously, in his fleeing from his adopted parents is when he goes and meets his father, and he doesn't know it's him, obviously. And again, through hubris is what leads him directly to kill his father. As you mentioned earlier, he didn't want to let Laius pass first because he was proud, and so that fate of hubris led to the fight and led him to murder his own father without realizing it.
Okay.
And then going on from there, that just, like, each instance and just leads to worse and worse into his fate. So then he solves the riddle of the Sphinx, and coming off of that with the hubris of a sense that he has saved the city, he goes and marries his mother and Jocasta, and that goes and leads to his final fate of being married to his mother and having killed his father. Yeah, so it's actually really ironic, as someone pointed out earlier, that he thinks that he has saved the city by solving this riddle of the Sphinx and then marrying his mother, but then of course, because he's there in that city and because of having killed his father and marrying his mother, it brings this great plague upon the city, and he actually brings destruction to the city.
Excellent. Remember that Sophocles is a moderate conservative, even though he's dealing with new ideas that have come in since the pre-Socratics. Sophocles is going to give us important parts of the already established 1.0 myth, right? So Sophocles is going to have the Oracle at Delphi be reliable. Oracles are all taken very seriously here. There's no irony about the gods, right? There's irony about the lives of mortals, but not of the gods. Go ahead.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the plague in the city caused by the injustice of Oedipus killing his father is that science 1.0, and it reminded me of the Iliad, the plague in the beginning of the Iliad.
Exactly right.
Yeah. For obvious reasons. So then, going on from there, they find out from the oracle that the cause of the plague is the murder of Oedipus, and he doesn't know that it's himself yet, Oedipus. But when the blind prophet Tiresias comes to him, he again has this hubris and refuses at first to listen to the fact that it could be him who killed his father and he's the one causing the plague in the city. And he brings up to Tiresias that Oedipus says that he solved the mystery of the Sphinx, and like questions the prophet, saying like, if you're a real prophet, why weren't you able to do this? And Tiresias brings up an interesting point that says that very skill which you had ruined you. The very skill of solving the mystery of the Sphinx is what led to you marrying your mother and led to your ruin. So he's kind of pointing out that holding his pride in this thing of solving the mystery of the Sphinx really isn't something so great to be held because it led to.
Very good. Oedipus' drive for knowledge is self-destructive, and it's supposed to be constructive. He's trying to free the city from the moral pollution that comes from the Sphinx, and instead he introduces more and worse moral pollution. Very good.
Then it's also really interesting that Tiresias is blind, and he mentions to Oedipus, you were born blind, although born seeing, and there's this weird distinction between the two. Tiresias, who is physically blind, can see the whole picture and see the whole situation, sees everything that's going on, and he mentions your perfect sight will darken, then your balmy marriage will at once become a hostile sea in which your household sinks, and a mass of other evils still unseen makes your follies equal and your children's too. So Tiresias sees everything that's going on and mentions your sight is gonna be gone, kind of predicting Oedipus is blinding himself in the end in a way. And yeah, so Oedipus thinks again through his hubris that he knows everything going on, and he thinks that from leaving his adoptive parents he thought that he was fleeing his fate, but really Tiresias can see that that led to his demise and his destruction. And so there's Oedipus who thinks that he can see everything and thinks that he has the clear sight, while Tiresias is physically blind, but is the one who actually sees everything.
Yeah, sight is going to be a metaphor for knowledge throughout this. Tiresias is conventionally a blind seer, so he's physically blind but can see into the future, so he has that second insight. Whereas Oedipus starts out with the physical sight but lacks the insight and then switches one to the other.
And so Oedipus is really the last one to see the whole picture. As you mentioned, Jocasta realizes before him everything that's going on and tries to stop him from figuring out who he is, and she goes off and kills herself. And it seems all the pieces are there, but Oedipus still refuses to see the whole picture and to believe it. So he really is the most blind one, even though, ironically, he thinks that he is the one who saved the city. And
When he finally sees what's going on, he gouges out his eye.
yeah. So then
Very
he
nice.
becomes blind and physically blind, but he then knows everything. So it's again that irony. And then another interesting piece of like irony I should mention, there's a lot of dramatic irony. Oedipus in the beginning mentions that he will like, do everything he can to find who killed Theseus, and he says, I'll even search for him as if he were my father's murderer, which of course it is, and it's himself, which
It's a horrible set of irony. And you all think it's funny. 666.
yeah, so then I just want to end by touching again on like the lesson that the fate cannot be avoided no matter what. And so again, another character who tries to like change the fate is Jocasta, because when Oedipus is born and she hears the oracle that her son is fated to kill her husband and her son's father, she leaves Oedipus to be killed as an infant, thinking that she can avoid the fate. But then again, kind of within that pride of thinking that you can avoid your fate, that leads to fate actually happening, and then also her marrying her son, and leads to her terrible outcome and suicide in the
That's
end.
exactly right. The harder you try and avoid fate, the quicker it comes to you.
So the whole story kind of really makes you question and realize that the oracles do need to be paid attention to. And it's interesting because at one point Oedipus said the oracles are useless when he was trying to figure out who he was. And Jocasta uses the example of her leaving Oedipus to die his son to say like, oh, the oracles and fate can be overcome because I left my son to die to avoid my son killing my father, but without her realizing yet that she actually did not overcome that. And so really you cannot overcome your fate at all, and the oracles are not useless.
It's a good job. The reason why this version of Oedipus doesn't end with a death is that this is worse than being dead. I mean, we can get another play at least out of this. I mean, he's stumbling around with his eyes gouged out, and his daughter's helping out. Go ahead.
Alright, I am going to do the Oedipus at Columbus play, which is actually Sophocles' last surviving play, and it was written shortly before his death, which is actually a very important point throughout the play, so keep that in mind as I go through the order of events. So this is the story, essentially, of Oedipus. He's been wandering the earth with his daughter Antigone, and at the beginning of the play, they find themselves in Colonus, which is a town outlying Athens. He specifically finds himself in a sacred grove dedicated to the Furies, which is highly significant. This is significant because Apollo had actually prophesied that he would die in a place sacred to the Furies, and that the land in which he was buried would be blessed. When the
Notice this, hold on for a second. This is written for Athenian and Athenian audience just before the war ends. So the idea is that Athens has been blessed, even with the pain of self-knowledge.
Yes. Thank you. When the men of Colonus find out who he is, they wish to expel him from their land, but Oedipus argues to justify his crimes. This monologue here is also significant in that it sets the stage for the rest of the play. There's not as much action in this play as there are long monologues, long kind of philosophical monologues from him, both him and Theseus and Antigone, actually. The three of them, all three have significant monologues, if not more, which is just a different way that Sophocles is going about writing this play. In his old age, I'm sure that affected the way he wrote this play. He also claims that he's on a holy mission, so he has that backing him now. Now he's saying, not only am I justified in all these crimes because I didn't actually know that I was doing these things while I was doing them, I can also save you guys and bless you guys if you let me live here until I die, and if you bury me here, I will bless your land. So he's kind of got that safety where nobody's going to touch him because they're not quite sure yet. They're first of all totally grossed out by him, but then now he's important, and they see that. Also, during this time, his other daughter, what's her name? Ismenes, is that how you say it? Ismenes. She arrives, and she tells of the battle being waged back in Thebes between the two brothers, and she also says that Creon may or may not be on his way to get Oedipus, because they have all found out about the fact that wherever Oedipus is wherever he's buried, that land will be blessed. So Creon wants Oedipus back in Thebes. He also does not want the brothers to take over Thebes. He'd rather have Thebes for himself. And then enters Theseus, who is the king of Athens, and he is very significant. I would argue probably the most significant character in the entire book, because he's in the entire play, because he's kind of the hero. And the reason he's so significant is because he represents the justice and righteousness of Athens. And of course, this is an Athenian play in a time where Athens has been suffering a lot. And so this is a big morale booster. This play is a big morale booster, specifically this character of Theseus, for the Athenians watching this play. Theseus sympathizes with Oedipus and offers him aid. It's interesting, Theseus does not even question Oedipus. He just instantly takes him for his word and offers him aid. And there's that idea of hospitality I see coming back. You're in my land,
Yes.
I'll protect you, which is very important and also a very righteous view of Athens itself. When Creon comes, he claims to pity Oedipus, but Oedipus will have none of this. He sees right through him. So Creon tries to steal his daughters, and Theseus rescues the daughters. Very, very heroic scene when he comes back, and they're like, "Oh, father, look at this prince that saved us." And it's this is further representing the righteousness of Athens and the lawful righteousness of Athens. Oedipus' son Polynices arrives begging his father's forgiveness, but Oedipus doesn't even want to hear what he has to say. It is important to note, though, that Oedipus does end up listening to him only because his daughter Antigone convinces him to. This is another place where we have kind of this philosophical and rhetorical argument and monologue from one of the characters, and in this case it's Antigone, and she actually has a couple of them during the book, and as we see going into the next book that Joni will present, she's a very intelligent young girl, and she's very good at speaking. And so he listens on account of her words, but he does not forgive his son. He actually ends up cursing both of his sons, and prophesied as well that they will end up killing each other in battle. Going on further into the play, Oedipus ends up realizing he's about to die, and in order to repay Theseus for all that he has done for he and his daughters, he wants Theseus to see where he is buried and to pass that on to his son and his son's sons, and they have to keep it a complete secret, but in this way Athens will forever stay safe from enemies. This is obviously significant for the Athenians watching this play at this time, because they were going through a raging war for so many years, and this idea that their land is blessed is a really important one. Now I'm going to go over just some significant parts and things that stood out to me about this play. There seemed to be a theme of redemption, which was not apparent in Oedipus Tyrannus, which I know I brought that up earlier as a question. But in Oedipus Tyrannus, we had talked about how he didn't end up dying. He did end up gouging out his eyes, which is seemingly worse than death. But throughout the whole play, once he finds out what he did, and once everybody else finds out what he did, he's completely shunned. In fact, he even shuns himself. He can't even see himself or anything that reflects him, his wife or his children. And so he gouges out his eyes. And so there's no redemption in that play. What he did was so unbelievably sick and wrong that he's unseeable. But in this play, there's seemingly a lot of redemption. He seems to have kind of turned the curve in his life and realized, everybody's been looking at me like this, but I actually think I'm a little bit justified in what I had done because I wasn't aware of it while I was doing it. And so he presents himself in a redemptive way, and furthermore, Theseus, more importantly, sees him in a redemptive light as well. And this struck me as interesting because I know that this is a play, arguably, maybe the last play Sophocles wrote, if not one of the very last that he wrote. And he was, I believe, in his 90s when he wrote this. This is where we dated it. And I do wonder if this theme of redemption is also Sophocles reflecting on his own life. And as you get older, you're kind of like, oh man, I made a lot of mistakes in my life. I hope there's some redemption, And so maybe Sophocles did have this idea that that we do need redemption in order to go into the afterlife. Whatever that is that you may believe the afterlife is, there needs to be some sort of redemption before you die. So maybe, and I don't know this for sure, but maybe this play being nearing the end of his life, he's starting to reflect more on his life, and so it is a reflection on his thoughts.
You're right, that can be taken further. This is 2 years, he's writing this, the year that he dies. It's 2 years before the final fall of Athens in 404. So Athens is on the brink of being destroyed by the Spartans. And this is not only his evaluation of his own life, it's his evaluation of his hometown. Look, you really can't escape your fate. You gave it a good shot, but instead, ultimately, you caused your own destruction the same way Oedipus did. And we've been blessed by Oedipus being in our town, and hopefully we ourselves will have some sort of redemption in the future. But it's very clear at the time this is being written that Athens is about to be destroyed. So we're looking not just at the end of Sophocles' life, we're looking at the end of Athens' life. Right, so this is brief. He lays at the foot of Athens before he dies.
And some further points was something I had already pointed out throughout the my order of events that I've already given you, is that this play is filled with much philosophical dialogue, which I also think is noteworthy. We had talked about how sophistry was kind of on the rise, and I think that that's very, very apparent in this play. You have a audience of Athenians that are listening to these long soliloquies that are very well put together and very convincing, and how much words can convince people. And in the first play, in Oedipus Rex, Oedipus thinks no words were going to save him. No words were going to save him. He was a sick human being. But in this next play, that's turned around, and he can convince people of his innocence through his words. Whether or not you believe that he's innocent or not is not important. It's the fact that he actually was able to convince an entire people of Athens that he was innocent after he did all these incredibly awful things. So I do think that that is noteworthy, and also that a lot of those wise words were from a young girl, Antigone. And I do think that it shows Oedipus's growing wisdom. And I do know that that's also a theme throughout the Greek plays. In all of them, you see that through suffering comes wisdom, and I think that this is another point that points back to that.
The downside of this is that you don't get wisdom until you've messed up. All right.
It's true. And then there is also a theme of the inescapability of fate throughout this, as we see in actually all three of the plays, obviously. And it's this idea that no matter how innocent you may be in your actions, you are still fated to engage in the wrong actions if you've been given an unfortunate fate. This in and of itself speaks of some sort of redemption to me, because it makes you feel bad for mankind in a way where it's like, no matter how hard you try, guys, you're just going to screw up. So there's something kind of comforting about that, even if the way you screw up is sleeping with your mom and having kids, really sick things. But maybe they saw this as some sort of a comfort. It was in some way of kindness to the Athenians to say, you guys have really screwed up, but maybe you were just fated to screw up. So it's not completely your fault. So that's kind of comforting in a weird way. And then another point is Oedipus's blindness, which I know she had already pointed out. It seems to point back to the blind seer, Tiresias, who Oedipus had mocked before realizing he was telling the truth. And it made me think about how a physical blindness might suggest spiritual sight. And throughout this play, Oedipus prophesies a lot, and he foresees a lot, and so it's almost like he's the new Tiresias. He curses his sons, and they end up killing each other, as we see in Antigone, and I think, and he also in Creon at one point, and I was thinking while I was reading this, well, this is interesting. Can just anybody curse somebody and it comes true, or do you have to be a special person? So
Good
that's
question.
something I actually wanted to ask you.
All right, yeah, that's actually an excellent question to ask. Back at the time of Greek tragedy, or at the time of the Old Testament, people dealt with words differently from the way they deal with them now. Right? Think of Jacob and his brother. What's the older brother's name?
Esau.
What?
Esau.
Esau, yeah. We have the father is old, and Esau is the elder brother. So Esau is supposed to get the father's blessing, and the majority of the property goes down to the male line. The mother, Sarah, is it? I forget some. What? Rachel. Well, all right. Whoever it is, the mother helps the younger son, the second son, get over on the father. The father says the words, and then the other son comes back in, and he's been duped. Okay, nowadays, if we were to do that, all right, suppose you had another sibling, your father, was duped because he was old and blind, and the mother was in cahoots. They give the blessing to the wrong son number two. Okay. Now we would say, okay, son number one, come on over here. I'm going to ignore that. That's not the real thing. I am now going to say the blessing for you, and you're all set. Okay. Why can't they do that during the Old Testament? Here's why. He said the magic words. And once you say the magic words, words have power. Words have qualities that are not simply markers of meaning. In other words, it's like saying a magic word that actually changes the world. Once he has pronounced the blessing has been said. It can't be unsaid, because words are magic back then. All right? So now, here, there's also a magic to words. Curses mean something. If you're cursed, you're done. That's bad. There's nothing you can do to fix that. So, who's cursed in this? Well, Oedipus is cursed, and his family is cursed. Jocasta is cursed, and so is his dad that gets killed at the crossroads. His children are cursed. There's Polynices and Eteocles. They kill each other. And then there are the two unmarriageable daughters that follow him around. They're also cursed. Creon gets cursed in the process. Haman curses his son, curses his father, Creon. Creon, I believe, curses him back. In other words, everybody's cursing everybody else. And these are magic words. These have power. In other words, it's what linguists call a performative. The difference between a performative and a descriptive is this. If I say the table is gray, I'm telling you something that describes the table. But if I say a justice of the peace, and I'm in front of a couple that want to get married, and they go through the ritual, and at the end of it I say, I now pronounce you man and wife. That's not a description. That's a performative. When I say those words, bang, you are man and wife. So saying the word accomplishes something in the world. Just like giving a sentence. I'm the judge, I have been proven guilty. I say, I'm going to sentence you to the following. And what that means is you are going to spend exactly that amount of time in jail. Again, it's a performative. To utter that statement is to make it come true. All right? So words for us now are very different. They've been drained of their magic for us. All right? They just describe the world. Back then, if you say, I curse you, you're cursed. And you may well not be able to get uncursed. And say, blessings work the same way. Yeah.
How did that work for actors if two people were like this, performing a scene, and one of them said, I curse you?
Right. I don't think that it would be a problem within the domain of this religious art form. All right. So I don't think that will matter. So you're onto something very good here. The power of words. Think about those who come in the name of God are great people. The name is magic. The name is different. Thou shalt not use the Lord's name in vain. It's a magic word. You're not allowed to say Yahweh. Only the high priest is allowed to say it in the Holy of Holies once a year. Apart from that, you can't use God's name. It's too powerful. All right? Words are magic back then, in a way that they're not now. All right? So once you've been cursed with this, particularly with somebody who's cursed is supposed to be really bad, a parent, your family, something like that. Okay? Everybody's cursed here, so of course we're going to make the mess of it. Good job.
Thank you. And the last point I had was what the whole play has been building up to, of course, is that the play ends gloriously for Athens. No matter which way you slice it, this is a triumph for Athens. So it's actually, I don't know, I guess it's considered a tragedy, but it's got a pretty redemptive ending for the audience. So I don't think the audience is crying at the end of this.
Like the end of the Odyssey, right? There are a few tragedies that don't end in death, and when they do, there's always some important reason why. Here, Athens is a smoking ruin. They lost the Peloponnesian War 2 years ago. This is written, or 3 years ago. This is written 2 years before it ends, but it's clear what's going to happen. This is his way of saying, look, even the greatest of spirits can't successfully fight against fate. Athens is Oedipus in a way. Okay, good job. I like the second part was funny.
Oh, that's
And so do you.
I've got that sick mind.
Get the sense of humor of Lady Macbeth.
I don't know if I should be proud of this, but.
Okay, well, I had Antigone, and just to start out, I would say it kind of has a lot less nuance than the other two. It was written a lot earlier. It seems to me in a few ways to have less like artistry and dramatic irony and more as kind of about like making a point. Like I can see it kind of like how Dickens' books, because he was like paid to write them and he like, had to produce them, a lot of them are kind of like lame. And like a lot of filler and you're just like making a point and
Needless extra characters and needless descriptions. Fair enough.
exactly. And I think for this play, I found it to be kind of cut and dry, like tragedy. Like it has all the elements, and everybody dies at the end, except Creon. So anyways, I'll get into the events. To start it off, it's got a kind of difficult backstory to it. The Civil War has just ended. It's like the day after, and forgive me for the pronunciation. Eteocles and Polynices have killed each other, and the opening scene is Antigone talking to Ismene, and she's telling her that Creon has forbidden anyone to give Polynices burial rights, and that she's absolutely going to ignore him. And Ismene is like, I can't believe you're thinking about doing this. Like, we have to submit to whoever's most powerful. And I found this is kind of like the beginning of a theme with, I did find that I was thinking of the Sophocles a lot during this theme, so this definitely like made me think of Thrasymachus. Creon is, the whole idea of might makes right is pretty strong in Creon, and that Ismene's behavior and kind of reaction to Creon is like that she's accepting this, that might makes right, and that we should listen to the laws of whoever's in power. She says, I'm ruled by stronger hands, we must submit to this, I'm forced, I have no choice, I must obey the ones who stand in power. And Antigone has the completely opposite view. She's called irrational, absurd. She says, leave me to my own absurdity, which is like kind of interesting, but she clearly has the sense that she's doing what's right, but their worldviews are just like, they don't intersect. In that Antigone's main value is this idea of natural law, and Ismene is like, might makes right, and I should listen to the king. So anyways, so they have that conversation, and then the next thing we see is the chorus. They're kind of like talking, kind of recapping everything that happened. And makes his big announcement, and the chorus submits to him, like Ismene did. And so Creon says, you know, no one can give Polynices burial rights. I absolutely forbid it, and honestly, it kind of made sense to me. I mean, it's like, he was explaining it like, look, this guy, you know, we said he couldn't have the throne, and then he comes off and like starts a civil war, and like now we're supposed to give him burial rights? I don't think so. Like, I'm not gonna honor both brothers equally. And I definitely see where he's coming from in that respect. Just as an aside. And then so he's talking about this, and then a sentry comes on scene. I think this is actually a really interesting character because it's just like not what you would expect in this situation. Yeah. So it kind of like, you know, those Shakespearean characters that come on and you're like, why aren't you taking this very seriously? Kind of like cracking jokes or whatever. And I kind of saw him. The sentry arrives with the news that someone had sprinkled dust on the body, which would have sufficed for the burial, your obligation to bury your family member. So it's like, darn it, you know, he doesn't even have to have like a mound, burial mound. He just has to have dust, you know, over him. So that happened. And the sentry arrives and he's like, I don't know why I'm here, because you're going to kill me. Please don't kill the messenger. But we failed to prevent anyone from performing the burial rites. And of course, Creon goes on this kind of big thing about money, and it's kind of interesting, and how like money corrupts, and you guys are all, someone probably paid you off to do this. And I just kind of saw the sentry as like a product of sophistry in a way. At one point he says, he's kind of talking about like betraying people, and he says, it hurts a man to bring down his friends, but all that, I'm afraid, means less to me than my own skin. That's the way I'm made. So he like kind of admits that there's some moral sense, but he actually doesn't care about it at all.
He has kind of ignoble honesty.
Right. Very honest, but I'm not sure why. Anyway, so this happens, and then he tells the sentry to leave and find the person. The sentry's like, oh, I can't believe you're letting me go. I'm not going to find the person. So he says that. So once he goes, the chorus has another few lines, which are kind of interesting. This is a short play, which is why I'm kind of going into detail, because this ends pretty quickly. And the chorus has this kind of longer speech about man and like man's powers, which I thought was I wasn't sure how it tied into the rest of the play. Maybe I just didn't understand it well enough, but it did talk about like how powerful man was, and it was kind of like, I could see that in an Athenian audience, you'd kind of like appreciate this idea that he talks about how
Hubris still seems like a good idea 2 years before the war starts.
Right. Yeah. And he brings this like really kind of intense sense of hubris when there's this quote: "The oldest of the gods, he wears away, man wears away." Like by plowing the earth, that like he's better than all the gods. He's super smart. Like how intelligent, how great.
Kind of a Greek thing to believe.
Yeah. So the chorus has this sort of big, long part of a bunch of lines, and then the sentry comes back with Antigone, despite what he said. And he's like, you wouldn't believe it. Like we all decided that we were gonna, strip the body and then see if anyone showed up, and she did. And here she is, and she doesn't deny it, so she's guilty. And then Creon's like, is this true? And she's like, yeah, it's true. And so then he says, I'm going to kill you and your sister. And so they kind of like drag the sister out, and then the sister's like, I want to die with you, even though I was like trying to, not have this happen. And Antigone's like, no, I don't like you anymore, pretty much. But like, it's just like mad at her. You don't deserve to die for this. Like, I did all the work, which is like kind of a weird point of view.
They're competing to see who dies fastest.
Right. But yes, so Creon rolls death for both of them. And he's not really saying it because it's the right thing to do, but rather that he can't back down at this point because it would be a sense of weakness, and this kind of backs up the Thrasymachus-esque point of view where it's like, might makes right, so if I look weak in front of this like woman, and he says that a bunch of times, like, this weak woman, are you kidding me? Like, if she undermines me, I'm dead.
This inability to look weak, The Greek is behind the alien dialogue.
Right. Gotcha. Didn't think of that. Yeah, and so then he decides this, and then his son Haman comes out, starts simple, like, you're great, this is so smart, but then he kind of like starts pushing back. And something that's interesting is that Creon's like, I rule for myself, I'm the king. He's asked this by Haman, and Haman's like, what a good king you'd make on a desert island by yourself. Like, what are you talking about? You rule for yourself. And so this is kind of, this whole idea is that Creon sticks by this idea that he's protecting his own right as a king over the city and over the honor of the gods, which is Antigone's, her reasoning is that this is what the gods want, and I don't care what Creon says, if this is what, like, the natural law says. So anyways, he wants to protect his own rights first. And so then Antigone is dragged away. She's put in a tomb alive to, like, die there. And at the very end, she says, quote, I alone see what I suffer now at the hands of what breed of men, all for reverence, my reverence for the gods. That's her reasoning for why she's sticking to the story and why she performed the burial rites. And then, so she's dragged off, and then Tiresias comes in to kind of like save the day. But, so he's trying to convince Creon. Creon's like, of course I'm going to listen to you. Like, you've never known me to not listen to you. And then Tiresias is like, you got to not do this. Like, you got to stop. You got to, take Antigone back. You got to make up with your son, all this stuff. And Creon's like, wait, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, make me look so bad. And then the chorus kind of like adds some support for Tiresias, and then Tiresias is like, if you don't do this, your son's gonna die. And Creon's like, okay, never mind, I'm backing off here. Clearly, this wasn't a good idea. And this is part of the big theme of like listening to good advice. Haman says that in his speech, like that's his biggest thing that he wants to tell his father, like listen to the people who want to give you good advice. And Creon's like, no, I refuse to. Hubris. So anyways, he finally relents, goes, buries Polynices, and then when he goes to the tomb where Antigone is, they find out that Haman had gone down, she had hung herself, he was down there, Antigone had hung herself. And they get down there, and Haman's very distraught, and he kind of like lashes out, and then he ends up just like stabbing himself and killing himself. And so then Creon takes his body back, and then in the meantime, it's kind of interesting actually. They have like the chorus talks to Creon's wife who comes down, and then another messenger comes and is like, truth is always the best option. It's kind of interesting. And then he's like, yeah, your son killed himself. And she's like, goes away silently. And the chorus is like, that's worrisome that she just went away silently. And the messenger's like, no way, that's just nothing. And then he's like, actually, maybe I should go check on her. So then he goes and checks on her, Creon comes back with his son. The messenger comes out like, oh, your wife just killed herself. And then she cursed you. And Creon's like, shoot. Well, what else can he say? He blames himself. And he doesn't get wisdom from suffering until everybody's dead. Except for him.
That's the way tragedy works. You don't find out how much is too much until you've gone too far.
And then, so that's the story. And then just some themes / I don't know, things worth mentioning. I think the major themes are the interests of the city paramount before family and natural law. The natural law versus civil law, what I was talking about in terms of Participicus makes right versus traditional values. So a question of the gods, well, like they'll back up human decency despite the verdict of king, which is kind of an interesting thing to be saying in an ancient civilization. Another thing that's interesting I thought was that the gods aren't present in the play. the other plays of Sophocles, unlike the Oresteia, for example. None of them are actually have any lines or have any presence, except that they're kind of there, guiding how people should act and fate. So, yeah. One more thing. Yeah, the hubris prion. I think this is kind of backing up Athens' idea that like democracy is better than monarchy, because he's a tyrant. And then, yeah, that's all I have to say.
And I gotta give you some of the backstory. This is actually worse than it sounds. You wouldn't think that possible. But the Greeks are an inventive people. Let's start out with Theseus in Oedipus Colonus. He's going to be our king of Athens. He's our savior. What do you know about Theseus and how did he get to be king of Athens? Yeah.
Wasn't it just like a myth? Like, wasn't he just like...
They're all just myths.
He
but-
just put, like, was proclaimed the founder of the city?
No, the city's much older than he is.
Oh, okay.
Didn't he kill the Minotaur?
The Minotaur, yes, he kills the Minotaur.
He comes back and his father kills himself because he forgot.
Yeah, it's kind of it's another one of those weird Greek things. At the time that Theseus is a young man, his father is the king. His father is King Aegeus, Aegeus. His name is going to give the Aegean Sea its name. Okay. Now, at the time they have a problem with Crete. The Minotaur lives there in a labyrinth. And every year, the Athenians are forced to send 7 young men, 7 young women to Crete to be eaten by the Minotaur. And this kind of bums them out. I mean, they really don't want their children eaten by the Minotaur. You can kind of understand that. Fair enough. So, Theseus says, Dad, I'm a Greek hero, so I have to go on a journey and I have to fight people. Well, Aegeus says, okay, that makes sense to me. Who do you want to go fight? He says, I'm going to go kill the Minotaur because it's eating our children. He says, well, okay, that's a good idea. I mean, everybody will think you're great if you go and kill the Minotaur. So he goes to Crete, and he sails on a ship with a chosen, hand-picked crew. And his dad says, here's the deal. Have any of you ever been to the Temple of Poseidon outside Athens? No, okay. Temple of Poseidon is on a long spit of land, and it's on this big cliff, and it looks out on the Aegean, which didn't have a name yet, just the water. Okay. So he says, Aegeus says to his son, here's the deal. I'm really anxious about you going to be a hero and killing the Minotaur and all. So here's the deal. On the way back, I want you to give me a signal as to whether you've succeeded or failed. If you put up a white sail, that means that you're coming home a victor and you've killed the Minotaur and he won't be able to eat our children anymore. But if you lose the battle with the Minotaur and the Minotaur kills you and eats you, I want your comrades to come back with a black sail. And that means looking out on this big spit of land from the Temple of Poseidon, I'll be able to see whether you're alive or dead. Okay. So that's the premise. Now, Theseus gets there with his pals, and they realize they can't work out the problem of the labyrinth because he's brave, but maybe not all that quick. There's a fair number of Greek heroes that are like that. Okay, so he's looking around, trying to figure out how he's going to solve this problem of the labyrinth, because it's one thing to get in there and attack the Minotaur, but then how do you get out? In Crete, the king's daughter, Ariadne, falls in love with this Greek hero. This happens a lot in Greek myths. She's a young girl, here we're talking about 13, 14 years old, all right? And she becomes infatuated with him. She sees him as kind of a godlike figure. So she says, here's the deal. Ariadne says, I'll help you defeat the Minotaur, and I'll help you destroy my father's labyrinth. But if I help you do that, Dad's going to know I was involved, so you got to take me with you, make me your bride. So I'm going to be the Queen of Athens. All right. Theseus says, no problem. How are we going to solve this problem? He says, I'm great at spinning. And so what I have here is a ball of yarn. When you go into the labyrinth, stretch out the string, all right? And that way you'll be able to retrace your steps after you attack the Minotaur and kill him. Okay, all looks good. So Theseus goes in heroically with a sword and a ball of yarn. All right? He's unrolling the yarn, gets to the Minotaur, fights him and kills this fearsome half man, half bull. Okay. He's coming out. He gathers his men. It's time to jump on the ship now because, you know, the Cretans are going to be angry. And Ariadne says, you promised. And she says, okay, you come too. So they take off from Crete. Now, Theseus is looking at Ariadne. And he's thinking, what have you done for me lately? Because granted, you helped me destroy the Minotaur and get out of the labyrinth. But I don't want to marry you. You're crazy. Right? You turned your back on your own father and your own family, and you are bad news. So I'm going to have to lose you in the process of getting home. So they come to an uninhabited island. They say, Ariadne, here's your new home. And Ariadne is unceremoniously tossed off the ship. She's at the island. Get ready for this. She's going to say the magic words. She curses Theseus. And you know when people are cursed, that's all messed up because the magic words have been said. All right? Now eventually, one of the goddesses is going to turn her into a spider. I forget who or why, but she's great at spinning. And that's going to be her fate. But she curses Theseus. Theseus says, later, goes back to Athens, sailing in with a ship. Theseus is not all that quick, apparently. So he forgets to change the sail on his ship. His father is looking out in the distance on this promontory where the Temple of Poseidon is, and he sees the fateful black sail. In despair, he takes a flying leap off the promontory and is smashed at the water and the rocks below. Right. Thus, he gives his name to the Aegean Sea. That's what they call it, named after Aegeus. Aegeus had a bad time because his son was stupid because he got himself cursed and just didn't change the sail, which has got to be the single stupidest thing that we've seen in any of these people. I mean, in other words, everybody's got a bad time, but you could have at least used your head and thought to change the sail. He's just stupid. All right. Oh, sorry, Dad, I was careless. And Dad's, of course, dashed on the rocks. Okay. All right. So he comes back and says, I got to tell my dad, I killed the Minotaur. Everybody's looking at him like, black sail. All right. Dad's been dashed on the rocks because you didn't change the sail, nitwit. I says, oh, wow. Bummer. I guess I'm king. Yes, you are. But you're going to get yours. Theseus. Okay. So Theseus causes the needless, despairing death of his own father. Again, once again, fun for the whole family. And Theseus is going to seem like a hero here, but he too is cursed. Seems like everybody's cursed. And all these curses are sooner or later going to be realized. So you need to know that because Aegeus is going to be important when we read Euripides next week. So you have to know that Theseus is the son of Aegeus, and Aegeus ends up coming to a bad end. Notice how all these stories are dovetailed. The Homeric poems and the tragedies all riff off each other. They're all connected to each other. They are all appealing to a body of myth that everybody recognizes. In other words, when you sit in a Greek tragedy back in ancient Athens, everybody knows the story that we're going to hear about. Right? It's how the particular playwright is going to handle that, how they're going to characterize the people, and what the dynamics are going to be like that changes one to another. Okay? So, you need to know about Theseus because we're going to meet Aegeus, his dad, all right, when we read Euripides. Okay, that's the first background you need to know. Second thing is Antigone. All right, I think this play, and many critics think this play, is somewhat more complicated than it appears to be. Here's why. Antigone, all right, is a young girl who does not know herself very well and also lacks a sense of proportion. In other words, she violates the Delphic injunctions. Okay. Do you think, given her upbringing, and given the fact that mom committed suicide because dad is her son, and that dad gouged his eyes out and tried to walk around with him in the intervening years, and the fact that no one will have anything to do with them because they're pariahs, because they're ritually polluted. Antigone means no marriage. That's the name of her, or that's what her name means. Okay. Anti, opposite, no marriage. Okay. Antigone, how can I put this? Her upbringing has caused her psychological problems. So yeah, she's the great example of natural law thinking, which is a funny thing to find in a mentally disturbed 14-year-old girl. I mean, here she's thinking these deep thoughts. I mean, she's not exactly Aristotle. All right? Okay. So, she is one really twisted individual. All right? Which is what you would expect from her upbringing. You know, watching dad gouge his eyes out and all, and then, you know, kind of walking around with him. Mom's dead. The two brothers are dead. All right? And they're pariahs. You know, they're driven at pillar to post. Okay. Antigone is just hitting puberty. She'll be 13, 14 years old. All right. She does not know herself, nor does she know her motivation. She doesn't understand her own reasons for doing things. At some level, she believes that what she's doing is following the command of the gods, natural law, which you get by natural reason. But she's a 14-year-old girl who's totally twisted. So she's not a great example of philosophical reason. Instead, some of the wires in her brain are seriously crossed, particularly the ones pertaining to sex and death. Now, Freud called those the two poles, like a battery, of the human mind. Life and death, sex and destruction, eros and thanatos. And she seems to have a strange mental orientation. First off, during the entirety of the play, she shows no interest and no concern about Haemon, who is her betrothed. She never says, oh, wow, I really wish I could marry Haemon. Or, Haemon, why don't you come and plead my case? She ignores him. She seems to have no interest in Haemon, which is part of why she's willing to die, because she knows where this leads. But also, her sexual feelings, which are kind of early and primitive at this point in her life, she's a young girl, and her close connection to death and destruction, the wires have been crossed, okay? Think of it this way. Suppose I'm a psychiatrist, right? And I ask a patient to do free association, all right? I see something, you tell me what it reminds you of. And the idea is we're going to find out how your unconscious works, because whatever it is you come up with indicates something operating in your subconscious. All right, here we're going to look at line 891, and Antigone says, My tomb, my bridal bed, my house, my prison, cut in the hollow rock, my everlasting watch. Here's what I want to do for you, okay? I'll say something, you tell me what pops into your mind. I say to Antigone, tomb. She says, bridal bed. All right, well, that's different. I don't know if, I mean, maybe I could ask the rest of you ladies. If I say tomb to you, does bridal bed, is that the first thing that comes into your head? Well, it's the first thing that comes into her head. The connection between her bridal bed, where she has sex and gives life, and her tomb, the wires are crossed with this girl, and she's really twisted. All right? So she's always at the end, she's saying, that's a shame I'm not going to get married, but I am going to be dead. Okay, that's different. But again, what would you expect from somebody that grows up like her? She's cursed, the family's cursed, everybody's committing suicide and incest and great stuff like that. She's really twisted. She does not find Haman interesting or sexually attractive. Haman finds her attractive, but that's not the problem. All right? She has no interest in Haman. Who does she have a very unwholesome interest in? Polynices, her dead brother. Now, I want you to get this, because this is actually, I mean, critics have been arguing about this for 25 centuries. Yeah, it's worse than you think. These would be line 995 to 1000. This is where she explains, I mean, after she's done all this stuff about natural law, just before she dies, she actually comes to a realization as to why she really did this. Never, I tell you, if it had been the mother of children, or if my husband had died, exposed and, or never, I tell you, if it had been the mother of children, or if my husband died, exposed and rotting, I'd never have taken this ordeal upon myself. Now remember that natural law applies to your children and your husband too. Never defied the people's will. What law, you ask, do I satisfy with what I say? A husband dead? There might be another. A child by another too if I had lost the first. So children are replaceable, husbands are replaceable. But my mother and father both lost to the halls of death. No brother could ever spring from them again. Okay, so she's only willing to defy Creon, to bury Polynices. If it had been her husband, her child, and look, there's no closer connection than mother with the child of her own flesh. She said, look, I'd let them rot. And why is it you would let them rot? Well, they can always be replaced. Okay. So you could replace your children, I guess. You could replace your husband, yeah, I guess. But you can't replace your dead brother. She has a very unwholesome, incestuous desire that she does not recognize for her dead brother. And she doesn't let the fact that he's dead get in the way. Again, this is beyond twisted. It's easy to misread this play as being a very simple, straightforward lesson in natural law. Yeah, it's that, but it's also a lesson in how people deceive themselves. She thinks she's doing this to honor the gods. She's doing it because she has a thing for her dead brother. Yeah, I know, you just want to shake your head like that. And of course it's funny too, yeah. You're all wicked people. So the point then is this. Antigone, at one level, is a great martyr for universal moral justice. She's also a deeply confused adolescent girl with a very unwholesome fixation, a sexual fixation on her dead brother. Yeah. So, yeah, she talks a good game about natural law, but as she's being led to her death, which reminds her, of course, of sex, that's really bad, she says, you know, now that I think about it, the hell with natural law. I mean, you know, with my husband, my child, I don't care. Polynices, him I have to take care of. Yeah, I know, it's really twisted. So, this poor girl, now many readers and many critics, including Goethe, some very famous ones, have said, look, that doesn't belong there. That's not part of the play. That can be part of the play. The best we can tell from the textual evidence, yes, it is part of the play. It's not an interpolation. It's not something somebody else put in there. This is the actual genuine Sophocles. So the point then is this: do not oversimplify this play. She's a psychological nightmare. All right? There's no psychiatrist that could work this problem out. I say marriage bed, you say tomb. All right, that's terrific. I don't see how we can fix this. You know, this is like when I go fishing, my friends occasionally bring me fishing reels that they made a complete mess of. And if they've done a bad enough job, I say, look, I can't untangle this. Just cut the line, get rid of it. And the tangles of Antigone's mind are the kind where a psychiatrist might plausibly say, look, there's just nothing I can do for this. You want to have sex with your brother and he's dead, which is not a good thing. And you claim that you're doing this out of nobility and natural law, and in fact, you're driven by incestuous desires that you don't understand or control. Ouch. So, of course, she ends up dead. Haman ends up dead, but doesn't end up dead until he tries to kill his father and spits at his father and curses his father. And then, quiet Eurydice, and I like her. The silence is really ominous there. Says, I'm going to go back to my house and kill myself. But before I do, I want to make sure that I curse Creon, and everybody knows it. Okay? So, here we have the ultimate familial dysfunction. Oedipus is Oedipus. That's a problem. Jocasta is dead. Ismene survives, but what kind of life does she have? Everybody else ends up dead, mostly by suicide. All right? So curses are all too real for the Greeks, as they were for the writers of the Old Testament. They are magical words with magical properties. Same sort of thing with blessings. For example, in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, he's not describing the peacemakers as being blessed. He's saying it's a performative. I say the peacemakers are blessed. It's like, I now pronounce you man and wife. It's a performative. Right? Here, nobody understands himself very well. And when they do, it's at variance with the idea of nothing too much. Even the greatest of human benefits, which is this connection at Delphi between man and God, we can find out what the gods think. Even that has its limitations and its imperfections. We get told, know thyself and nothing to excess. That didn't help Oedipus. It also didn't help Antigone. As a matter of fact, it hasn't helped anybody in any of these plays. They're all dead, killing themselves after engaging in incest. Right? Remember when I said the tragedy is about irrevocable mistakes? Well, pretty much there's nothing anybody can do. Antigone hung herself, Haman killed himself, and Eurydice just goes and kills herself thoughtfully off stage. We don't have to watch, we don't have to have the body count increase. But then this Creon saying, wow, I really messed that up. Admirable, yeah, of course, you messed that up. Now, your life has been spared just like Oedipus's life was spared, and your life is totally messed up too. You thought you were going to avoid the curse of the house of Oedipus? No, you're going to be the final installment. Now, this, I think you'll all admit, is fun for the whole family. I mean, you really want to raise your kids on these sorts of myths because it's so wholesome. I mean, there's just one memorable moment after another. And of course, that 6 or 8-year-olds should be exposed to this would be normal in Athenian society. Yeah.
Makes me think of poor Mill.
Oh yeah, right, exactly. Well, Mill's subject to a different set of myths, but you're right. God help us, John Stuart Mill. We'll talk about him when we get the chance.
What would the point of Sophocles including that little like hidden thing about Antigone? What would the point of that be?
The point of that is to show that this is not just a morality play. It's not like Every Man from the Middle Ages. This is not meant to be the good young girl against the wicked old king. In fact, the wicked old king is really wicked, but she's totally twisted. And she thinks she understands herself, but she doesn't. All right? So be careful about people that can make good speeches about the lofty intent that lies behind their actions. They may well get driven by impulses that they neither control nor understand. Think of it this way. Drop back in your own mind. Think of your first crush. All right, you all had one, don't tell me differently. Okay. You no doubt thought to yourself, what the hell is this? I mean, here I am being pushed around by feelings I didn't know I had, and that I don't know how to control. Why do I feel drawn in this direction? And whatever it is, it's not rational. This is not something I'm choosing. This is something that's being imposed on me. In other words, everyone has irrational sexual impulses that are built into them. And while it might be that our lives would be much less complicated if we didn't, we're stuck with them. So when the Greeks say that human beings are rational animals, you want to put a little asterisk next to that. They are potentially rational animals some of the time. Now, none of you are going to get married rationally. And it's a good thing, too. I mean, you want to fill out a checklist? No, no one wants to live like that. In other words, the irrational comes to the center of our considerations when we consider rationality and the limits of human rationality. All right? Here, Creon thinks he's making good sense, but no, he wrecks everything. Completely destroys his family and himself. Antigone thinks she's making sense, but she's not. All right? The two boys, nobody knows what's going on, and everybody's on a one-way trip. All right? And so the interplay of rationality and irrationality is what makes Antigone in particular a deeply disturbing play. In other words, it's not just a battle between good and evil. It's not a melodrama. In this case, rather, there's no good side. There's a crazy girl who doesn't know why she's doing this, who gets herself killed. And there's a crazy king who thinks he knows why he's doing what he's doing, and he gets his whole family killed. He'd be better off dead. He ends up at the end of Antigone the way Oedipus ends up at the end of Oedipus Tyrannus. All right? He'd be better off dead, but he isn't. Okay? Now, next week, do I understand this correctly? We're doing Euripides? Okay, here's the score. Euripides is a guilty pleasure of mine. All right? He's even more twisted than this. I happen to like it, but I feel bad when I like it, and often I feel like, I don't know, that I should do some sort of penance for really enjoying it. You're going to like it too. The things you laugh at are really starting to worry. Okay. 3 plays. Who wants to do them? One is the Trojan Women. You ever thought of what it'd be like? Because Euripides does. What it'd be like to be on the losing end of the Iliad? It turns out it really sucks. So Oedipus is going to be, or rather, Euripides is going to be going after the Homeric ideal. Who wants to do the Trojan Women? Gentlemen. The ladies decide they like Sophocles. You get the Trojan Women.
If I might, I'd very much like to do Bacchae, if that's
Well,
okay.
you do the Bacchae then. You like the Bacchae?
I very much so.
That's a bad sign too. That's right. I like it too. It's just,
Who
it
was
makes
it?
me wonder about your mental health.
Who was it who said that tragedy is when I stub my toe, comedy is when you fall in a manhole and die?
Yeah, okay, it's something to that. Yeah. I like that definition. We're also going to be doing Medea. Medea is angry. And when she's angry, she gets all upset. You're doing Medea. Okay, because you think it's funny. You're sick enough to do that. Okay. And what's the other one? We got Medea. We have
Trojan Women.
What?
Trojan Women.
The Trojan Women I've done.
No, he's
Oh,
doing
he's got the Bacchae. All right, the Bacchae, all right, is all about rationality. The Trojan Women is all about the Homeric ideal and why what comes around goes around. And Medea shows you just how crazy people can get. She's very upset. And, well, she has a bang-up finish. And, of course, she's going to make a deal with King Aegisthus, you know, the father of Theseus, that's going to get her off scot-free.